Just seconds later, the fuselage of the Boeing 737-800 tore apart, flames engulfing the midsection. The strange part, it didn't fall from the sky. Jeju Air Flight 7C22.6 landed right on schedule, then exploded on the ground. This marks the deadliest domestic aviation accident in South Korea in the past 2 decades. The incident immediately triggered responses both domestically and internationally, especially as early findings indicated that a cockpit technical issue and an ineffective emergency response procedure may have played a role. What exactly happened on Flight 7C2216? And why less than 6 months later did a similar disaster occur in India, this time in just 32 seconds? On the morning of December 29, 2024, the Boeing 737-800 bearing flight number 7C22 began its final approach to Muan International Airport. On board were 181 people, including 175 passengers and 6 crew members. Just before touchdown, the flight crew received a warning from air traffic control there was a high likelihood of bird activity near the runway area. Nevertheless, the aircraft continued its landing procedure as usual. At Zor 8:58:56, a Mayday signal was issued. The cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and flight data recorder, FDR, had stopped functioning just minutes earlier. According to initial assessments, the right engine continued to produce thrust after a bird strike, while the pilot inadvertently shut down the left engine, the one with less damage. This decision most likely created a thrust imbalance between the 2 engines, preventing the aircraft from maintaining directional stability during the emergency landing phase. With the landing gear unable to deploy, the pilot was forced to perform a belly landing. Upon runway contact, the 737 skidded for more than 200 meters, lost all control, and slammed directly into a concrete barrier at the end of the runway. The intense friction and physical impact caused the aircraft to erupt into flames almost instantly after the crash. Flames rapidly spread across the aircraft's fuselage. Rescue efforts stretched nearly 50 minutes. However, according to confirmation from the Korea Transport Authority, only 2 people, both crew members, were found alive in the aircraft's tail section, the only part not completely engulfed by fire. The remaining 179 individuals perished at the scene or succumbed to injuries en route to emergency care. Many of them were families returning from a vacation in Thailand. No one could have imagined that their homebound journey would turn into their final fate. After debris was collected and the crash site secured, investigators from the Korea Aviation and Railway Accident Investigation Board, AREB, began analyzing black box data and interviewing air traffic control personnel, as well as witnesses at the airport. One of the most debated discoveries was the right engine, the one that struck the bird, was still running at the moment of touchdown, while the left engine, which had suffered less damage, had already been shut down by the pilot. Early analysis indicated this wasn't a software error, but rather a manual decision made in the cockpit. As a result, the unbalanced thrust caused the aircraft to veer out of control horizontally upon ground contact. Scott Hamilton, an international aviation consultant, remarked, "This is a textbook example of how a misjudgment made in just a few seconds can determine the outcome of an entire flight." The second issue, both the CVR and FDR, the cockpit voice and flight data recorders, stopped functioning just minutes before the crash. No clear technical reason has been identified for why both systems failed at nearly the same time. This complicates analysis of the flight crew's specific actions and raises concerns about the effectiveness of routine equipment maintenance. David Soucy, former safety inspector at the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration (FAA), stated, "In aviation investigations, any gap in data becomes a serious barrier. Speculation must be eliminated, only hard facts matter." Following the release of preliminary reports, victim families and domestic pilot associations reacted strongly, particularly because the interim findings leaned heavily toward pilot error. Many argued that key environmental factors were being overlooked, such as the lack of an energy-absorbing design in the concrete barriers at the runway's end, or the flight's approval despite overlapping with peak bird migration activity. Amid growing pressure from public opinion and international media, the South Korean government announced two key reforms: deployment of thermal radar systems to detect bird activity at major airports starting in 2026. A full review of runway end barrier designs prioritizing energy-dispersing materials over the current rigid structures. Leading aviation bodies like ICAO, ECI, and FAA are closely monitoring the case and questioning the coordination between ground-based alerts, cockpit response, and the level of automation in mitigating bird strike risks in older Boeing models like the 737-800. Just days after the 7C-22 disaster, numerous international aviation organizations and experts voiced their concerns, not only expressing condolences, but also raising critical questions about the global aviation safety system's ability to respond to short but severe threats. The International Air Transport Association IATA released a statement expressing deep concern over the fact that bird strike detection systems at many Asian airports still fail to meet early warning standards, despite the long-standing awareness of such risks. According to ICAO data, over 14,000 bird strikes were recorded globally in 2023, most occurring during takeoff and landing phases. In Europe, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, AELA, called for a full review of emergency response procedures related to landing gear failures and asymmetric engine issues, especially for the Boeing 737-800 series, a model still operated by over 200 airlines worldwide. Meanwhile, in the U.S., an independent FAA technical oversight group proposed testing new technology capable of temporarily locking out instant danger cockpit commands such as engine shutdown or fuel system rerouting unless dual confirmation is received from the flight crew. The warnings, recommendations, and policy changes mentioned above reflect just how seriously the international aviation community views the Muon incident. But tragically, as questions around cockpit decision-making, limits, interface design, and behavioral oversight remained unanswered, another disaster struck. Less than 6 months after the 7C-2216 crash, global aviation was shaken again by a near-mirror accident, one that also began in the cockpit and ended with a casualty list that could not be undone. This was Air India Flight 171, and the entire tragedy unfolded in under 32 seconds. Though occurring in different regions and involving different aircraft types, both incidents shared a deeply troubling similarity: a misstep in the cockpit that led to irreversible consequences. According to the preliminary report by India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, less than 40 seconds after takeoff, the fuel system of Air India Flight AI-171 was switched to the cut-off position, causing both engines to shut down almost immediately. Flight data recorder (FDR) logs confirm this switch was done manually. There was no evidence of software or automation error. In the Jeju Air 7C-2221 case, the situation played out in reverse. The pilot shut down the left engine despite it being less damaged, while the right engine continued generating thrust. This created a power imbalance, making it impossible for the aircraft to maintain lateral control during landing. Again, no system directive triggered the action. This was a judgment error made under immense time pressure. Both incidents reveal the inherent risk in allowing direct cockpit operations without safeguards like dual confirmation or command limits. AI-171 crashed just 32 seconds after takeoff. No electronic system had time to reboot or assess the situation in that narrow window. For Jeju Air, there were only about 4 minutes between the Mayday call and impact. In that brief span, the pilot had to manage multiple threats at once: a bird strike, alert landing gear failure, asymmetric engine power, and incoming instructions from air traffic control. The overwhelming influx of critical data within a confined cockpit environment created a scenario that exceeded human cognitive thresholds. In such cases, time isn't just an emergency factor, it's the line between a correctable mistake and an irretrievable outcome. In both crashes, crew psychology became a central line of investigation. With AI-171, the International Federation of Airline Pilots Associations, IFALPA, urged against prematurely attributing fault to individual pilots without first fully assessing mental health and operational stress. This caution comes amid a rise in accident reports, showing signs of psychological strain in the lead-up to incidents. The Jeju Air crash also aligned with this pattern. The final 4 minutes of black box data just before the crash were lost, making it difficult to reconstruct the exact sequence of actions. While Korea's Aviation Safety Board leaned toward pilot error as the leading cause, civilian pilot groups and victims' families demanded a reassessment of psychological factors under extreme stress, as well as a critique of cockpit system design that failed to prevent critical errors during unstable mental states. With two catastrophic events, Jeju Air 7C2216 and Air India 171, occurring less than 6 months apart, a critical question emerges. Does the current aviation system conceal systemic risks that could resurface at any time? Jeju Air operated a Boeing 737-800. Air India 171 used a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. These aircraft do not share the same design generation, core electronic architecture, or flight route categories. Yet one striking commonality lies in this: both cockpits allowed direct human control over thrust management systems without any electronic guardrails or dual confirmation layers. This raises a significant concern about how manufacturers are designing flight operations for real-world scenarios. An analytical report by Flight Global Insight 2025 also pointed out in both cases fuel-related controls. Whether the cutoff switch or engine shutoff button lacked protective locks during flight mode, even though these actions could lead to immediate catastrophic results. The Muan disaster also highlighted another design flaw: the runway barrier at the airport. Instead of absorbing energy, delivered a full impact collision that accelerated fire spread. Although designers referred to it as a physical safety barrier, the structure failed to dissipate force, turning a runway skid into a fatal crash. Following preliminary investigation findings, several countries began re-evaluating their airport infrastructure. Since February 2025, airlines such as Singapore Airlines, Lufthansa, Japan Airlines, and others operating Boeing 737 or 787 models have implemented dual-track inspections, simultaneously assessing cockpit hardware and reviewing landing conditions at major domestic airports. There's no denying that modern aviation technology has significantly lowered fatality rates over the past decades. However, the Jeju Air 7C2216 and AI-171 incidents underscore one vital truth: a single misstep, even within mere seconds, can render all protective systems ineffective if no behavioral error prevention layer is in place. Dr. Masao Ikeda, a cockpit systems expert at the Tokyo Institute of Aeronautical Technology, commented, Current systems still assume the pilot is the most reliable link. But when decisions must be made in mere seconds, that assumption no longer holds. If cockpit design isn't revised, if radar systems aren't deployed, and if pilot mental fitness continues to be overlooked, then the question isn't if it will happen again, but when. In both disasters, everything unfolded within mere seconds. It wasn't wing structure failure, it wasn't bad weather. There was no explosion. Just a single action in the cockpit, whether intentional or unconscious, was enough to push the aircraft into an uncontrollable state. Modern aviation is considered one of the safest modes of transport in the world. Statistically, the likelihood of a plane crash is incredibly low, with fatality rates at roughly 1 in several million flights. Yet when these rare incidents do occur, the consequences often defy comprehension, not just because of the staggering loss, but also due to the lingering sense of insecurity they leave behind. The current system lacks a second verification layer. There's no automatic warning to confirm is this action appropriate for the current flight phase. The system still depends on human decision-making, but offers no guarantee that humans have enough time to respond correctly. What do you think was the weakest link in these two cases, human error, equipment failure, or systemic design? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Every perspective adds value to future analysis. And don't forget to follow the channel for the latest updates on aviation, global security, military insights, and major world events that are capturing global attention.